Welcome to our latest episode of Montresor Legal's General Counselling. Today I have with me Harry Borovick. Harry is the author of AI and the Law, a practical guide to using artificial intelligence safely, and also General Counsel at Luminance, an AI business. So very well placed to talk to us about AI today. Firstly, thanks for joining, Harry.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So a few things to cover on the AI side. Obviously gaining a lot of popularity and traction over the last few years, and with that has come a certain amount of not issues but potentially concerns, or people looking essentially at the practicalities of AI and what it means for them, what it means for their business, and what it means for the law more generally. So I wanted to kick off with a nice easy subject matter, which is ethical considerations, which I'm sure you hear a lot of. As a lawyer, what ethical considerations should you be anticipating when using AI in your business?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. So, kicking off with an easy one. Ethics isn't a simple issue to address because it has a huge element of subjectivity to it. So when we're thinking about how lawyers should act in a ethical manner, quote unquote, there is already existing guidance that regulators both in the UK or internationally put out where lawyers sort of broadly know what's expected of them. Their first duty is generally to the court. If your client is asking you to do something which would make you in breach of the law or otherwise your duties to the court, your duties to the court come first. Secondly, your duties to your client, and then your wider regulatory responsibilities. And I think that when the sort of advent of current excitement around AI sort of kicked off late 2021, early 2022, lots of lawyers didn't quite understand some of the upsides. And when looking into those upsides of using AI, were either completely diving in without thinking about how they still needed to comply with those requirements. You know, there's the famous case of the lawyer in New York who used ChatGPT for his case research. But you also had probably, I would say, the majority of the profession take an extremely reserved approach and be very hesitant to dive into AI, when actually what they probably should have done, and the way to balance sort of ethics and being a fast mover, is to dedicate specific resource. That might be an individual, it might be a team, it might be a committee, to specifically understand how you can mitigate those risks and then move as fast as possible once you've done that. And I think it's one of those ones where if most people, organizations, lawyers, take a breath, do a bit of research, it becomes quite easy to manage most of the risk, because really your concerns are, what are you doing with your client's information?
Yep.
Are you maintaining your duty of confidentiality and in many cases legal privilege? And are you doing so in the best interests of your client while still acting reasonably in the eyes of the court? Yeah. And I think that increasingly we're seeing lawyers find that balance, and a lot of law firms are putting, not just law firms, but in-house teams as well, are putting dedicated resource towards mitigating any potential risks. So, for example, understanding where data goes when they use particular AI companies.
Well, yeah, if we take data
please,
for an example, and no, that's okay.
Ramble on.
I better say something in this.
Yeah, sorry, that's quite typical of me. Apologies.
No, all good. So with data, what should companies be looking at or particularly concerned with? You know, data sales. A lot of big businesses now are built on their data. So where do you look to make sure that is, you know, pretty much kosher for your organization?
Sure. I mean, when looking at how data should be managed when acting as a legal professional, the starting point is, what is the sensitivity of the data I'm inputting? So if it is non-sensitive client information that has no names, no addresses, nothing identifiable, but is a legal question relating to a client, in abstract, that's much lower risk. So people don't really actually need to understand that much, because asking a non-identifiable question doesn't really expose any client to any particular risk. Now, in reality, people don't want to be restricted by how they type things into a search system or a research tool or a contract matrix, whatever it might be. What they want is the flexibility to treat it freely. So the main factors they need to bear in mind are how robust are the contractual assurances that technology provider is giving them, how well do they understand those assurances. And within that, those assurances should be very clear as to where data is going, what they are doing with data, if anything. Does the client's data get segregated from anyone else's data? Are they using that data to train models or not? And if they are, what is the upside for the user or client of that model? Because there are plenty as well, we should be transparent, who actually do an exchange where they're very transparent. They buy data. And that is a large industry. And it can mean that if you are, a law firm, one of the reasons lots of law firms are building their own tech internally is because they realize the value of their data. So I think those are the primary considerations.
And where should lawyers get their guidance from? So apart from your book, obviously, you've got sort of, are you mainly talking about case law, regulations? Will we see more, precedents coming out in future? Are we still relying on stuff that's maybe outdated? Where do you think people should be looking at for guidance on this?
Sure. I mean, in terms of the legal duty to clients and maintaining sort of compliance with legal obligations as a legal service provider to a client, whether that's internal or external, i.e. you're an in-house team or in private practice, it's basically the same as it's always been, right? The regulatory guidance is the same and the legal frameworks around that are the same. GDPR, for example, relating to international data transfers, you need to understand if your data is staying in the UK, the EU, going internationally, whatever it is. Those frameworks should be well understood. They're not particularly new. Existing legal obligations about confidentiality are the same. Now, there are some niches within this because there is newer AI regulation, both in the UK, the UK are slightly less so, but more the EU and US, which does, for certain high-risk types of legal work, add additional conditions. So, for example, if you're in some sort of criminal defense and it's likely to prejudice your client's case, there may be additional considerations you need to factor in. But that's not the majority of legal work.
Yeah, and on that point, what are the kind of liability issues that people might see from things like a biased algorithm?
As a legal professional, you mean? Yeah. So zooming right out, that hasn't really changed, which is that the lawyer, irrespective of how biased or incorrect the information they receive from an AI system may be, the overriding duty for them is to verify their work, take responsibility for their work. They're the ones with a regulatory duty to their client, and that sits with them. I gave an example recently that if someone's using Microsoft Word and autocorrect changes a number from a 1 to a 9, and then your client signs the contract, the fact that it was autocorrect that changed it rather than you checking it doesn't really change anything. It's still your delivery to that client. They signed it based on what you delivered. You're responsible, and there isn't really much of a difference between that kind of spell check functionality and AI in terms of a regulatory obligation from lawyer to client.
Okay. And one thing to consider, you used a nice analogy in your book of comparing doctors to lawyers. What is it about the personal touch that we may still need that maybe makes sure that AI doesn't completely take over the whole world?
Well, I'm glad to hear you've read the book. That's nice. You're the one. Now available in Waterstones, all good bookstores. The nuance of human interaction is still really important to not just the legal profession, but all professional services. The example I give is that if you're receiving a severe diagnosis of a terminal condition, the facts may be the same whether they're received through a computer terminal, an avatar, no matter how realistic, or a real person who sat across from you. And that real person sat across from you is likely to bring a greater level of warmth and comfort. But there's also subtleties, the ability for humans to pick up when other people are uncomfortable or there's more information to dig into rather than just answering the questions that are directly in front of them is really important. And one of the things you'll often see between, a junior lawyer And a more experienced lawyer is the ability to connect the dots and bring in the next question that might be useful, sensible to understand, contextualize something in a way that doesn't offend the customer, doesn't offend the client, but also is worded in a way that is proportionate to what you need in order to deliver a good service.
Yeah, and it's not just a futuristic problem that, I mean, everyone's dealt with a chatbot by now, and sometimes you do prefer that personal touch.
It's true, but let's not berate chatbots, because frankly,
no, it can be good.
Frankly, I'd rather not wait on the line to speak to a person sometimes. If my answer is transactional and simple, there is a great place. And I think where the future of the profession is going is that chatbots and tools that are automated and avatars are going to provide great, useful service for ordinary needs.
Yeah.
But great legal work, great professional services typically come in for extraordinary needs. I have a big piece of litigation, a large corporate transaction. My career rides on this. I'm not just going to trust an automated system when I sometimes, even if it's correct, want to be able to look another person in the eye and ask them for their thoughts.
Okay. And on that, I posted the rounds on LinkedIn recently. I won't name the author of the post, but it was essentially saying, I sought advice from a lawyer. I paid a big sum of money for that advice. Advice was wordy, not very useful. And then I put the same question to an online sort of AI tool and got out a similar answer, but clearer. The job of lawyers is done for. Discuss.
I just disagree. I actually think clickbait is a powerful thing. So I don't hate the post, and I'm sure there's a significant kernel of truth in that, because there are plenty of we shouldn't live in a world where we pretend there are only good lawyers and only lawyers who understand the question and answer it. I'm not always answering the question that I think I'm being asked, right? That is a nuance of human interaction.
Yeah.
But an AI chatbot doesn't owe a regulatory duty or carry professional indemnity insurance. And quite frankly, if I'm being asked to place reliance on something, even if I've used that as a first point of reference to get an idea of what I think the right answer is, and then go to a lawyer with a yes or no, is that correct question in order to reduce my costs, that's a great point. But I'm not, risking my shirt, my house, my job on that without any kind of safety net or fallback.
Yeah.
Because if that person's answer was incorrect from that chatbot, okay, well, they're just left in the same position, but actually probably worse off, because now they're acting on a false assumption.
Yeah.
So what happens if that lawyer who they received the advice from first has completely contradictory advice to what that chatbot said? Now, that won't happen in every occasion, but the ability to understand subtlety and give a nuanced answer that's something we actually want to rely on is very different from just being able to secure facts quickly. And I think AI systems are very good for enlightening us about facts.
Obviously, I agree with you. Otherwise, I may as well quit now.
Legal recruitment's a tough one if there's no legal jobs around. But,
Exactly. So yeah, I can't disagree on that point. But I would like to know what you think AI means for the legal profession moving forward.
I think I'm bullish, right? So I think for the legal profession, AI means better junior and mid-level lawyers sooner than we think. Okay. And the reason for that is there's so much drudge work. Like, we're just, I remember being a paralegal and having to do the page turn, the document sorting, the doc comparison, the bibling, the bundling, all the terms that give lawyers nightmares of their training and qualification process. Do I think that genuinely made me a better lawyer? No, I think that was time poorly spent that law firms needed to churn through in order to proceed and be able to get the instructions from their customers. But if I get access, if I'm in the room as a junior lawyer earlier than I otherwise would have been, because AI is doing lots of the work that I shouldn't really be doing in the first place, then by the time I'm 5 years qualified, I'll have actually really had an extra year or two of qualified experience by the time I get there. And so I'm very optimistic about what that means.
Okay. No, that's good. And I guess it's a matter of perspective as well. And there can be a bit more of a traditional viewpoint, maybe from senior partners in law firms, than there are to millennial, Gen Z, up and coming lawyers. That's something you explore a bit in the book when you talk about students and professors, and maybe talk us through, what does it mean from a studying perspective for people doing the SQE or an LLB, who they now have access to something which is a very powerful tool. How do you keep the discipline and the learning in the law without making it a copy and paste job?
That is tough. The reality is that academic institutions have always been behind students in terms of the ability to research, the ability to game the system. Now, having said that, does it matter? And the reason I sort of turn the question back is because when I'm in professional practice, I want my lawyers to have the competent skills to be able to verify an answer, that's for sure. But I want them to get to the answer as quickly as possible. I'm not too worried how they got there. And something I think is fundamentally flawed in the education system, and something that the education system resists, is we train lawyers, but also for lots of professional services, train people at the academic stage on a purely academic basis. There is a lack of practicality that doesn't set people up optimally to perform when they're in practice. So understanding all that theory with no application at the same time, and then having to apply it much later, by the time you're applying it, the fundamentals are a memory rather than something that's live in your brain. So I do think that is a real problem, and I think academic institutions are starting to do a better job of implementing more practical training as part of that process, and that practical training will include skills of using AI.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. I'd like to pick up on a point that you made there around you prefer people to be able to get to the answer quickly. One of the issues that clients may have now is, well, hang on a second, billable hours. I want a good product quickly. I don't want to be charged for something that takes longer than necessary. How do you quantify the two?
The billable hour is a problem with the entire concept of AI-driven or non-AI-driven efficiency, right? They are inherently at odds. There is a reason why AI adoption as a business facilitator has been... You'll see a lot of law firms talking about using AI, and don't get me wrong, Luminance sells to plenty of law firms that use it well. We also sell to lots of in-house teams. But the reality is in-house teams are taking up AI technology, but just technology generally at a far more accelerated pace, but also not just taking up, really practically deploying it. And the reason for that is their external providers who charge on an hourly basis, a time spent basis, aren't. And so they go, great, well, if you're not going to be more efficient, we'll be efficient and then deliver you something that you can then analyze on a time spent basis, but there's way less work for you to do. So I do think those are somewhat at odds. The reality, I think, will be that law firms will have to balance this out and catch up. What they'll probably do is more fixed fee models, but be more efficient within them. So, if to do a basic contractual review, let's say a law firm, for argument's sake, would charge £1,000. Instead of doing it on a time spent basis, they'd charge a fixed fee of £1,000, but actually their time spent would be, 500, and then they've made a larger margin on that time spent. That's probably what they do, which means the client gets a slightly inflated price based on the actual work done, but the law firm gets to balance out the cost of having bought AI technology and not lose their shirts in the process, basically. That will somewhat ease the transition.
Okay, and you talk about how in-house can be using it in some cases better than law firms. Can you give an example or two of how you've seen clients using your tools? Yeah,
absolutely. So, I mean, I can talk about how our own team uses it. That's great. We use it across as a contract repository for live contract negotiation. We're basically able to instantly draw out information from any of our contracts and immediately negotiate new contracts on that basis. But we've got great clients like actually Avianca or IDEX or AMD, Huge companies where their primary usage is understanding what's in their contracts currently and reapplying that as they're live negotiating new ones, instead of trying to remember what we previously agreed and how we agreed it, institutionalizing that knowledge across a business. Now, you've got companies like Koch Industries in the US, who's like a huge customer of ours. They're a great customer. They roll that out across other business teams so that other business teams, within the frameworks that legal sets, are able to negotiate and manage their contracts. That might be HR, that might be procurement, might be whatever team is appropriate, can sort of self-serve, but legal remains relevant because legal is setting the parameters of what's acceptable or not. So yeah, there's plenty of examples where that's the case.
Okay, that's good. I'm a GC or head of legal. In this scenario, I am. Okay, just play along for a second.
All right, I'll give you some rope.
I would like to dip my toe in the big sea of AI, but I'm a little bit nervous. It's a bit cold. It's a bit choppy out there. Not sure how best to implement it. Not sure how to look at tech on the whole. What advice would you give to someone who's thinking maybe tech, but at the moment is pulling back from it?
Well, I do think that the right approach, if you're a general counsel or in an equivalent role looking to implement technology to improve the function of your business or your function within your business, the starting point is, what's the actual business need, right? So before even looking externally and considering vendors and thinking about what you need from whoever, the first thing is identifying what your actual business problems are. Is it that things are too slow? Is it that things are inaccurate? Is it that there's poor communication between teams? Is it that there's tasks that seem like they should be easily repeatable in a more efficient way? Those are not all solved in exactly the same ways. And some tools can hit many of those at the same time. Some don't. Some are just will absolutely smash one particular target for you, but leave the others untouched. If that's the biggest problem in your business, then that's a great result. Now, it may be that you're looking for a bit more of a cure-all type approach, and you may hit a lot of notes, maybe not as well, maybe very well. It depends on what your specific problems are and how complex they are. So first thing is talk to other business units, because a GC making these decisions on their own is somewhat doomed to failure, because delivering it without an understanding of what matters to your CFO, what matters to your sales teams, what matters to your procurement teams,
do you want to come back to
service, is the starting point. But after that, it's about, you're going to have less of an issue if you go with a more quote unquote trusted vendor. Appreciate pricing and availability will vary and budgets do matter. But broadly, getting a subscription for a provider who is more reputable, has all the security qualifications you need, all the infrastructure that allows you to, sort of use it without thinking too much, that's a really good starting point. Do I know where all the data is going to be? All the questions we talked about earlier. Do I know where the data is going to be? Do I know that confidentiality is going to be respected? Do I know whether I want it or not? How data is going to be trained or not? Those should all be very evident, and a really good vendor should be very transparently supportive of all those things.
Yeah. Okay. And as in-house counsel then, how do you sell the benefits internally, or do you have any tips for someone who knows this product is going to solve one or a load of their issues, but is finding it difficult to get sign off, to get budget? How would you go about that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, in sales speak, they always have this conversation about who's your champion. And the champion isn't necessarily always the person who most wants to use a tool to improve their own life. It's the one who sees the tool as a way of solving the problems of those around them, and therefore they also become an internal champion for efficiency and success. And it will vary from organization to organization, but I actually often think, just looking at if you're a general counsel, which teams do we typically have the most friction with because of how we do things, not how we think? Because if we say no to things because they're wrong, then we say no to them. That's fine. But if we're saying no because we're too busy and we're having to turn down work or whatever it might be, that's a very different point. So if sales have continuous frustration with you because you're being inefficient and volume, you don't have budget to hire someone, but volume is a problem, then being more efficient is a quick solution to that. So suddenly if you approach the right people in sales, your commercial director, your sales director, whoever it might be, you've now got an additional champion who's like, you go into them and say, I recognize our interaction isn't perfect. I think I found a way to solve this quickly and easily, but I need some backers internally. Do you want to have a look at this tool with me? That's a really just transparent way of building bridges in a business, but also showing that they may well. I don't think in good faith most people think that other people in their business are actively trying to sabotage them, but they may think they're not hearing them. They may, well, that's it. But they genuinely, a lot of people just think they're not being heard, and sometimes making someone feel listened to is a good way of engaging them to support you.
Okay. And so, how can a legal team future-proof themselves? Can the AI maybe do too much, or people think they should expect so much because of AI, and then all of a sudden they don't have headcount to bring in hires? How do you kind of balance the two? How do you future-proof the role of legal?
Yeah, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, but I do think the simplest way to future-proof legal is to focus on a skills-based approach. Yeah. And what I mean by that is, if your skills as a legal team, let's say you're a 5-person legal team, if your skills are contract negotiation, great. If the business is doing well or the business is doing badly, the growth or lack of growth in the legal team is likely to look pretty similar. It's the holistic business that affects that. But if you are very good at contract negotiation as a team and your volume is continuing to increase, then future-proofing the skill becomes more than just, can I negotiate the contract, but how can I use tools that help me negotiate more contracts without actually adding any capacity around me in the team. And that means that the actual skill is not just the raw legal knowledge, but the technological understanding and application as well. There's also some soft skills of human interaction there, which is managing other stakeholders to interact with you properly through that technology. So it is a broader skill, but a skills-based approach is definitely what I'd say is core.
Okay. I think we've covered a lot on the practicalities side. Is there anything else that you feel sort of has come up in conversations that you've had recently, or that you're constantly getting asked by lawyers, just to make sure we cover all our bases?
I think the only thing I'd say that we've not quite covered, the only thing I'd say is that simplifying approaches typically yields the best results. So if you are setting parameters to manage the risk within your business, but also optimize the benefit within your business as to how people can use AI within or outside of the legal team, having a 50-page document that tells people how to do things is never going to land. Having a one-pager with some really clear guidance, even if it doesn't cover every eventuality, is always going to be better received by colleagues, by external parties, whoever it may be. Simplify is always the way forward.
Okay, perfect. Great advice. And then
maybe,
yeah, well, hopefully. So I think we've covered the ethical side, the practicality side. One other bit I'd like to talk about is the geopolitical climate with AI. There's lots going on at the moment. It might have changed by the time we release this. I'm hoping it will still be relevant. But maybe if we could spend a moment on Starmer's AI blueprint that he's recently brought out, I'd be keen to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the AI Opportunities Action Plan is, I think it's ambitious, audacious. I don't think it covers everything perfectly. I think it focuses broadly on bigger infrastructure and bigger AI companies internationally to try and bring them into the UK, rather than as much as I'd like to see to promote UK businesses internationally. But I do think it's a good approach, it's pragmatic, and it demonstrates they've actually listened to business stakeholders. So I think it's a strong plan.
Would you have done anything differently?
I would have put more either tax breaks or grants directly for smaller growth stage, sub 100 million revenue companies in the UK to help them grow. The capital resources available in the US are just so much greater. And because of that, UK companies often have to raise internationally. Now, something that can make raising internationally more attractive, or even raising domestically more attractive, is having strong incentives for investors to put their trust and risk in UK AI companies.
Okay. And on the other side of the Atlantic,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. President Trump, I should say.
Mr. President.
Mr. President. Good or bad for AI?
Who knows? Is President Trump good or bad for AI? Unknown. The main concern is unpredictability. That's really it. Trump unwound Biden's executive order regarding AI safety the day he came into office, along with many other executive orders. But I think Trump wants to see America win, whatever that means internationally. And America is heavily positioned for a tech-led international growth spurt that will continue as it has for the last 10 years. It's been a bit stuttering.
Yeah, well, will it though? Because my next question was going to be around DeepSeek, and that seems to have hit those companies, big tech, quite hard in the US.
Well, it's hit their market cap, but that's all. That's all
they talk about, isn't it?
Well, that's part of the problem. Is they should be looking at revenue, and those companies in the US make a lot of revenue, and DeepSeek was essentially it's very impressive, but it's basically built as a side project by a side team within a hedge fund. It's on a free basis in terms of deployment, so it's not really affecting geopolitical economy just yet. What it's done is just shake confidence in where people were just incredibly bullish on the AI space from an investment perspective. And I do think that the UK and the US and the EU are well positioned to have well-regulated, well-driven and innovative AI. Frankly, I think we'll see lots of the innovation that DeepSeek has come out with sort of swallowed up somewhat by Western AI companies, and frankly, more AI for cheaper, which is really the net outcome of DeepSeek, I think leads to more AI, not less, and that's still good for the Nvidias of the world as well as anyone else. More total capacity at a cheaper price sounds good to me.
Okay. And from one deep to another, deep fakes.
Oh wow, yeah.
Taking
See what you did there.
Yeah. Did you like that? All right. Coming to a podcast near you. So yes, deep fakes. How much are they going to impact things like politics, or generally the world as a whole, really? Because there can be quite a profound impact on the people who are being faked, but also the people on the receiving end of the fakes who are seeing something that they are sure is true, but is a load of rubbish. So what is going to be the impact of those?
Well, I think the starting point is it's important to separate out synthetic reality that is conscious and ethically done, and sort of destructive deepfakes. What I mean by that is one of the most successful UK AI companies is Synthesia. They essentially make deepfakes, for lack of a better term. They make synthetic avatars for customer service for business. And I think having, when we talked about chatbots delivering most of the advice we want from customer service for a simple question, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think that is perfectly fine and can enhance the consumer experience. I don't think any technology is per se dangerous. I think it's the application that's dangerous. Yep. And bad actors have always found ways of deceiving people, whether that's just simply pretending to be someone else. Forgery is no new thing.
That is a fair point.
The problem is the scale at which it can be done and how convincingly it can be done to even a discerning eye. And that is dangerous. And I do think we're seeing movements to strongly apply legal restrictions to deepfakes. We've already seen that in California. We've seen that in Europe. There are moves whereby any application to use synthetic voices, images, or videos have to be very, very carefully monitored, and even Synthesia or companies of its ilk have to be very closely watched by regulators, and I think that's fair.
And who's monitoring it now? Because you've seen Mark Zuckerberg recently with regards to Facebook. They're scaling back on on the checks and balances that they previously had. So is that going to be more of an issue now as people kind of lean towards Trump in the US, big tech? They are almost allowing the dissemination further than perhaps it would have been.
Yes and no. I don't think I'm personally a pro-good regulation approach kind of person. I don't think regulation for the sake of it is important. I'm not quite sure that the tech companies are necessarily the best people to self-regulate. Right. I do think that I would rather have freedom of choice. However, I do think the ability to flag up that something might be a deepfake or might be false information is still possible and should be done. Now, the other thing with Meta and various companies like that is, they are pushing synthetic avatars and synthetic content because there's demand for it. And I think that's fine. But understanding when something is fake or not, especially if it can have a potentially harmful effect on someone, is important. So I do think that things we're seeing out of the EU from a regulatory perspective about anything which may be generated by AI but have an impact on voter movements or on basically any sensitive major issue is dangerous. And I think that limiting the use of deepfake technology, for lack of a better term, but synthetic voices, images, or video to ordinary commercial business use for transactions and limited functions such as like customer service is probably somewhat sensible, unless it's just basically puff content on Instagram rather than anything to do with politics, because it's very hard to understand even when parody becomes so convincingly realistic, whether it's real or not.
Okay, so how can I protect my OnlyFans account? Don't answer that.
I think no one wants to see that, Josh. No one wants to see that.
Right, there's no market.
Subscribers 0, and it's free.
All right, moving swiftly onwards. I'd like to talk a bit now about the book recently released, as you said, in all good bookstores.
All good bookstores.
Yeah, Amazon. Hopefully you won't pay the price that I did when it first came out.
Yeah, you paid the full whack retail pre-release price. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks.
My publisher certainly does.
Thanks for the mates rates on that one. What was the most challenging part for you of writing a book?
The pace at which the AI space has moved over the past 2 years makes writing in practical, granular terms particularly challenging, because you want to talk in broad principles and then give granular examples, but you don't want those examples to be rapidly dated.
Yeah.
So that was always the challenge. So there were multiple updates as I went through. And that, simply making the time and being disciplined and sitting down and writing something regularly is the biggest challenge, frankly. But then having to re-sit down and re-update it as you get closer and then say, maybe I can actually use a different example that is more timeless is a good approach. And thankfully I tried to do that well. But that is definitely the challenge. And I think that applies when you're writing about any present circumstance or revolution that is ongoing. You have to accept that maybe you do a second edition. I don't know. Yeah, that might be the way, but keeping up with pace of technology is the hardest part when writing about live technology.
I can imagine, very time consuming. How did you balance it with your duties as a lawyer?
I'm not a big sleeper, so early mornings and weekends and less than restful holidays is probably the answer.
Okay, fine. And if you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to yourself whilst writing the book, what would that be?
So I wrote this book because I thought that, one, I'd always sort of wanted to have a go at writing a book, but two, I finally felt that I was in a field sort of ahead of the curve. And I think there are lots of professionals out there, whether lawyers or not, who don't quite realize how few people there are doing the exact kind of work they're doing, and yet that it might be generally interesting or useful to lots of people. And I think genuinely being critical, constructively, of what you do and how useful or specific bits that you do are early is a really good way to build the confidence to say, I'm actually going to dive in. And maybe you don't start with a book, maybe you start with an article.
Yeah.
You know, that might be it. But having the self-belief to critically assess yourself and say, well, I'm not very good at all these different things, but this one thing I sort of probably know more than the average, and that's a helpful starting position to drive yourself forward.
Okay, and on that, have you had any feedback that's meant a lot to you or that you've particularly cherished within that?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll probably be writing at least some chapters for other people's books, maybe another book. So
cool.
Clearly some publishers are happy, so that's all right. It's a good sign.
Yeah.
But the best feedback I had was actually, well, very kindly, one of someone I know, they actually bought the book for their dad, and their dad liked the book as Christmas reading. And I thought, well, if someone who is in their 50s or 60s is reading a book about AI and is competently getting through it and understanding it and is happy and thinks they can apply something from it, I'd say that's a win. So I'm very happy about that.
Brilliant. Sounds good. And if you did write another book, do you think it would be AI in the law too, or could it be something different?
No, most of the work I'm writing for other people, like contributing to other people's books at the moment, is on specific ethical questions. So I'm really I'm doing a lot of teaching at the moment, which I really enjoy. So I do some work with Queen Mary in King's College. I'm doing some work in the US as well at various American colleges. And a big focus there is balancing practicality versus sort of ethical risk. And I think for lawyers that is fascinating. I mean, we started this conversation with a discussion about ethics, and the nuances are extensive. I tried my best to be concise about it, not very well. But the ethical challenges move as fast as the technology itself, which is exciting.
And if there was to be a Harry Borovick memoir, what would be the title of that?
One Man and His Dog.
There you have it. That's all we've got time for, folks. on Montresor Legal's General Counselling podcast.
You've met my dog. You know, he's great. He's great.
Beautiful dog. Yeah. Thanks so much for joining me, Harry. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, as always. And appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Cool.